Thank you, Federica. Thank you for the brief and the brief intro. And indeed, the talk today pretty much covers the fellowship that I've just begun here at the Institute of Advanced Study, and I'm very, very glad to have the opportunity to do it, actually. And I'm very happy to see still a few faces, and I very much understand that some people would rather enjoy the hottest day likely of the year in the Netherlands outside than inside. So no worries about that, but maybe some of them will also listen to the talk later on as it is going to be recorded. Now, let's move on to the topic. So I've been since quite a while actually interested to see why and how actually issues emerge for public debate in digital communication environments. So think about, very obvious issues, of course. There's not much to research about in terms of Corona that just pops up, but other issues like diversity, or if we talk about sustainability, how do they actually emerge for discussion? Now, as Federica already said, I'm a communication scientist and I'm a scholar of strategic communication. So this is very much concerned with how do organizations actually communicate, how do they strategically try to direct issues in the public. Now, you could also think of it as corporate communication, or if you will, public relations, a term that is not that much used in Europe any longer. If we look at how public issues are debated, actually, from a communication perspective, from a strategic communication perspective, we can use the view of issue arenas. And here you have the kind of visualization, the visual framing or metaphor that I want to give to you for now. So that actually, if you want to translate that and follow me in that metaphor, then you would regard the issue as the ball in the arena. So the focus is on the ball, and the organization that tries to communicate around this issue, maybe tries to steer it into a direction, is then the torero. Now, when we're looking into issue debates, then we usually, from a strategic communication perspective, try to understand how organizations communicate strategically around that and how they try to steer the bull into the right direction. However, this is then usually a meso perspective on the organization, on its stakeholders, or sometimes we also look into at the more micro level in terms of how do attitudes or perceptions change of the organization. But when it comes to more public debates of issues, this actually might not go far enough in order for us to understand how these debates come about. So a bit of a more macro perspective is maybe needed here. And what I am actually very much interested in is to see how and when does the bull actually come to the arena? And which bull is it? So which issue actually pops up, becomes publicly salient, comes to public attention, and which one's not? And eventually then, if the issue disappears again, does it really die? Like the bull does? Or does it simply disappear, linger somewhere, and then re-emerge at some point? Now, I'm not the only one interested in this question, which kind of issues are going to be trending in the future. We just had in the Netherlands a big scandal around the Dutch army, who actually, it was revealed, gathered loads of social media data from Dutch citizens in order to understand where will be civil unrest with regards to the Corona measures, or which topics will come up and the public will discuss about or maybe go on the streets. Now, organizations, be they public or private, corporations have been doing this kind of environmental scanning for a very long time. And Bob Heath is actually, it's very nice that you're here today, Bob, because he is one of the founding father of strategic issues management, looking into this behavior of organizations when they scan the environment to understand which trends are actually going to pop up in the future. Now, if we look into what we know from a social and communication science perspective of issues, we usually refer back to life cycle models, so-called natural history models. First of all, when we look into what is actually an issue, pretty much all authors more or less agree that it is socially constructed. So it's defined as, it is, when does an issue actually become an issue? Well, some say when it's labeled as such. You could contest that in light of crises or things as the pandemic. or if various actors attach some significance to this problem. Now, also Bob Heath, very many years ago, actually said that all issues more or less have to do with equality, fairness, security, and environmental quality, if you bring it down to it. Now, I'll come back to that later. But these natural history models actually say, okay, that issues are emergent phenomena and that they follow some life cycle. Now, if we look, for instance, at the issue of obesity, and this is very much a strategic communication take on this issue. If we look at the issue of obesity, well, beginning of the millennium, and that's very much focused on the US here, you had more and more people who were suffering from obesity, and this kind of became a sort of public health problem. But there was a pretty concrete point in time when actually this public health issue was connected to a specific organization, and that is a specific fast food company, McDonald's. And some of you might remember, the documentary Super Size Me was published. Now, this is for the first time then actually combined or connected in a very, very blatant manner the public health issue of obesity and the kind of the purporter of that, or the one that's responsible for that was actually what the documentary tried to insinuate, McDonald's. Now, how did then, and the issue was still on the rise, how did then McDonald's deal with that? And that was actually pretty tricky from a strategic communication point of view. Well, first of all, it tried to kind of, massage the issue by introducing package labeling and nutritional information on its products. And then at some point it went a step further and also introduced new products to its menu, and also accompanied that with pretty annoying celebrity endorsement, so as to kind of try to cut the link between obesity and the company. And that kind of worked out to a certain extent. So at least at some point, this issue of obesity and this pretty strong link with McDonald's kind of a bit disappeared. Now, this is a strategic communication take on the issue of obesity. But obesity, if you look at it from a complex systems perspective and a public health perspective, can also be viewed as an emergent property of a complex system. And that kind of emerges from the feedback between body weight perceptions, weight-related behavior, and also social norms. So this is a paper that I'm citing by Rick, and I'm very happy that you're here today, and colleagues from the IAS who actually kind of looked at that from this point of view. Now, my idea is a bit in this fellowship to try to merge these perspectives. On the one hand, the strategic communication and the role of organizations and actors in there, and then also the complex systems perspective. And I will show you that actually I think works out pretty well and might help us get a better understanding of how those issues actually emerge. Now, especially when we look back at the turn of the millennium, we of course are, in terms of a media environment, in a very different situation than today. Now we're talking about a more digital communication environment. And I think this does make a difference if we talk about issue emergence. Why is that? Well, usually when we had those life or natural history models that actually came up in the 70s, around that, then what we assumed was actually that the public sphere kind of has a limited carrying capacity, that only so much attention can be devoted to an issue, and that only so much attention or issues can be published. Now, I would say actually that this is very different in a digital communication environment, where you might have even an endless capacity of stuff that can get out there, of communication that can be shared. Or do you only have endless noise here? So this is for sure, I think, one of the differences. Another one is that we're talking global scales, and that we're talking about many more actors and many more channels where such discussions can take place. And this is, of course, adding to offline spaces where discussions take place. Then again, do we really talk about country-level discourses here, or do we rather talk about more global discourses, especially when it is in the English language? We also do have, and I think this is a pretty decisive point as well, new intermediaries. And that is, if you follow actor network theory, you would call it actants. But you could also simply call it intermediaries in terms of algorithms and what people coin as algorithmic reality construction when we talk about which information do you actually get to see on the internet. And for sure, we do have a very much networked audience that we see online. So again, these natural history models in a digital environment is something that might behave differently or might not hold at all. And also those models have been criticized for overstating the extent to which activities just happen sequentially. They might be more overlapping, they might be more simultaneous, they might bounce back and forth. And do those issues really always emerge from events? And what is the role of organizations and other strategic actors here? And also the fact that, yeah, you do have seem to have this starting point of the issue, which is usually an event, and also this disappearance point. But do they really ever die out, especially in a digital environment where nothing is really forgotten? So what I would like to do now is to showcase my thoughts a bit at two examples. And my first example that I would like to share with you is actually the issue of diversity. Now, since when are we talking about diversity? In the US, it seemed to be a topic since the Civil Rights Act, so end of the 60s, or some claim even after World War II. In Europe, it is more since the turn of the millennium. In the UK, you rather talked about before that about equal opportunity. And Shell, for instance, the oil company situated here just across the river, actually did publish its first diversity report in 2005 already, but that was purely gender related. Then after the financial crisis, more and more attention was devoted to that, especially also in the light of the big tech companies and in how far they did diversity hiring. Then some media outlets started to report also on employment practices. And in 2014 only, Google published its first diversity report. So in this case, we cannot really say in diversity that the issue was really triggered by an event. It's rather the idea that some actors, some organizations, some strategic communicators tried to push the issue on the agenda. Corporations picked it up and propelled it further. Now, when we talk about issue emergence, there's quite some literature from political science, from sociology, but also from communication science that enlightens us. So how do issues actually emerge? And I don't think a single one of those explanations really bring it to us if we want to understand that better. But I think all of more or less taking them together in a more systemic, if you will, perspective will help here. And you will see, if I quickly walk you through them, that they very much resemble the properties of complex systems and very much relate to complex system thinking. Now, usually we would say that an issue is triggered by a so-called focusing event. So there's a crisis, there's a sudden, public, large and rare event that happens, and that's why people start talking about the topic. These events are often also controlled by some organizations or actors. But this is not really the case with diversity, is it? Then also you could say, well, some topics come really on the agenda because there's some political opportunities opening up. So be it an election, for instance, and a party puts it on the agenda, or be it that the media system creates a discursive opportunity for an issue to be discussed because it has its own agenda to bring it to public attention. Now, if we talk about news media, of course, we know a little bit about why journalists do write about certain topics and other not. This is the kind of theory of news values and newsworthiness. So we do know media report more about topics that have kind of a bad news component, right? If there's some dramatization, if there's some power elites, if there's some surprise or entertainment factor attached to it. But this is more the traditional side of media. How about social media? We also do know that those interact. So we do know social media and traditional media pick up their topics from each other, but we do not really know, but also not all of them. So it's not that all topics from social media are picked up by traditional media or vice versa. So there is actually quite some variance that is unexplained here in terms of which topics emerge on social media and where and when and actually by who. Well, when it comes to a certain media hypes, so remember, for instance, the Ice Bucket Challenge, those actually pop up, and it's always a consequence of some strategic communication by a corporation or an advocacy group. But these issues are usually rather not that complex. It's usually about getting some donations, as in the case of the Ice Bucket Challenge. But how does it then play out with more complex issues? You could also call it wicked problems, as the lecture of Karin Temer actually very much showed us. That wicked problems are characterized by the fact that no one knows where they actually come from. And this is also one of the characteristics, I think, as for diversity. We also know that feedback mechanisms play a role here. So cascading effects, as that is called more in political science, when actors imitate each other's behavior. So you very much see that, I think, when, for instance, the New York Times is reporting on an issue for a few days in a row, you will very likely that you will see that in the Volkskrant as well. So this imitating behavior plays a role here to put that to public attention. There's also some idea that if an issue has been discussed in a certain way in the past, so when we talk about diversity, maybe we are close to racial discrimination, then this also has to say something about how an issue kind of can receive more public attention afterwards. So in complex systems terms, it would more be like something like hysteresis then. But also networks, of course, play a role. I remember when I was talking about this project with Peter Sloot, he showed me a study he did where it was actually not the hubs that transported most information in a network, but it was kind of the surrounding nodes that were decisive, not the hub. So this is also very interesting in terms of shareability of information and content and news. And how does that again then relate to traditional media and what they actually want to write about or do write about in terms of news values? We do also know that culture plays a big role. We have values and norms that influence, of course, public discourse and also the strategic communication of actors. So we do see different patterns of discourse in different issue arenas. Look at diversity. It was not really kind of such a norm of value that you talked about in the 1990s, but it is increasingly being that. And if you, it is increasingly becoming institutionalized. So barely a job interview where you're not talked about your stance on diversity. I think just students here just started to create a diversity reading list because they were dissatisfied with the amount of diversity that we actually cover as communication scholars and we give them to read. So very much changing here, and I think that has a large influence. Algorithmic selection is also something that I think is important to consider here. When you look at online searches as kind of indicators of public salience, of attention to an issue, but also, of course, the output at the very same time. And what you then actually get to see on the internet is very much also influenced by the algorithms and how they filter the information that you get to see. So what some call algorithmic reality construction. And of course, and that's kind of my strategic communication take on it, the role of organizations. And here we're not talking about corporations only, but also political parties, interest groups, think tanks, social movements, issue advocates that really propel the issue on the agenda. And in this case of diversity, I think that, yeah, a lot of strategic actors such as corporations, but also some more advocacy groups played a role. And if you maybe, some of you might, I might ring some bells if I talk about feedback and networks and the other emerging properties that I've just been mentioning, because this very much relates also to complex systems thinking. And I think if we kind of try to consider those together and merge kind of the knowledge that we have from the social sciences with a more complex systems perspective, we might better understand actually the set of rules that underlie issue emergence in digital communication environments. Well, at least that would be my goal for the fellowship. Now, diversity is, I think, an issue that is not propelled or not triggered by an event, but we do also have other issues that have been triggered by events, but nevertheless never really made it to public attention up until now very much. And one of those is, I think, sustainability. I brought you here kind of the visual framing of mostly corporations, how they actually visualize sustainability. And what you always see, of course, are those agricultural fields. Very important are also raindrops. So raindrops really cannot be missed if you visualize sustainability. Also very important are windmills and the planet, the blue planet. So for the blue tip in the green. So this is kind of what you get if you think about that. But when sustainability, or the term, kind of was introduced first, and that was really triggered by an event, namely Club of Rome, publication of the report, The Limits of Growth, in 1972. However, triggered by an event, but then never made it in the aftermath a lot to public attention, right? It really took a long, long time until sustainability has become the prominent issue that we regarded and the grand challenge as we regard it today. Or even though in the meantime, there have been so many political and public events that could have triggered and could have brought sustainability also for a longer time to the public attention. Think about oil crises or peak oil discussion, or the discussion on climate change, or to use another documentary, An Inconvenient Truth. But never did sustainability stick so much to public attention as it did in the last 3 to 5 years, I would say. Now, why is that? And when I think about sustainability, I'm wondering, when will it disappear again? And is there then really a death of issues, or will it just languish around and then re-emerge at certain points? Or is it just a reformulation, actually, or a renewed communicative construction, if you will, of the equality, of the issue of equality, of fairness, of security, environmental quality? So, and then with regard to such a wicked problem or grand challenge, can there actually be a logical endpoint to it, that we can actually then talk about disappearance or death of such an issue? Now, these are the two examples that I wanted to bring to your attention. And I also would like to share with you the biggest puzzles that I'm actually struggling with at the moment. And I would love to hear your thoughts on them. For one, what is actually the issue arena that we're looking at if you're talking about public issues? Well, I just remember my Rens Vliegendaal just read a paper of mine and just said, well, you know, communication science is all about public issues. So more or less what point are you trying to make here, right? But what is actually the issue arena that we are looking at? And which system or subsystem, also from an analytical point of view, do I have to look at in order to better understand that? Are there country-specific boundaries, or do we really always have to take the global scale? And I've been struggling with that since I analyzed the debate or the media discourse on the issue of glyphosate. Glyphosate is a pesticide that whose license was deemed for renewal in 2017 by the European Union. And this was clearly a political decision where it was many actors had a say about, and of course many interests fought for political attention, so that this pesticide actually can be used longer in the European Union. And I analyzed media coverage about that. And what I found was that there's loads of debate on this issue, for instance, in Germany, but not so much in the Netherlands, on the other hand. And those discussions were also influenced by other events that happened or regulations that happened worldwide, for instance, in Sri Lanka or the US. So in terms of issue arenas, really, where do we draw the line for the sake of analysis, and what does make sense here? Now, eventually the license was renewed for 5 more years, which means that next year we actually will see the next decision on glyphosate. And then, and this is maybe more to the really complex system guys here in the room, and how far can we then predict with what we know from the past what will happen in the next discussion? So, and how far does this complex system thinking then lend to prediction above and beyond hysteresis maybe? In terms of my approach of researching this issue, Emergence, I have the feeling that I really do not come much further when I look at specific cases or case studies. So my idea is to, during this fellowship, also approach this puzzle more from a simulation perspective. But then the question is, do you use real world data? Do you come much further with that? Or do you rather simulate based on assumptions? Now, and that's more another puzzle that I have, and that is more fundamental, is can I say something about issue emergence if I do not know the population of issues out there? If I do not know how the noise in the digital environment actually looks like, and which issues actually are present both online, of course, also offline. Of course, it would be very interesting to look into the Dutch Army's database, but I think this is rather unrealistic, also because this is deemed illegal, well, the database and the actions around that. And then lastly, is disappearance actually a separate topic, or can I approach it, or a puzzle to research, or is it maybe the opposite of emergence of issues? So these are my biggest questions, and I would love to hear your thoughts on them, and of course on the idea more generally. Thank you very much for your attention.